While investing in the stock market can give us an 8 to 10% return annually, there's another investment that can yield and produce a much higher return. And these types of statements are often regarded as a scam or that someone is trying to sell you something. But in this video, we will investigate the possibility of storing money within yourself, that an investment in yourself is actually the best investment you can make because it has the potential of giving the highest return. An investment in yourself could potentially produce a much higher return than the stock market. For example, in my early 20s, I had a job as a receptionist and later I worked in the customer service. But then I switched to the sales department where I got a much higher salary than in the first two positions. So simply by investing in a few books and learning how to sell, I had a 50% increase in my income. And 1 month I had double the income compared to what I used to have. And if we would look at the investment in these books and the trainings that I took, they have had a much higher return than if I only had invested them passively in the stock market. And later when I started and ran my first successful business, this skill was so valuable to me and it enabled me to really see an increase in my net worth. Another example is when I started to use paid advertising to get new customers. Before I had only reached out organically to people on social media and told them about my services. But then I invested in a training program on how to use paid advertising to automate this process. And this also had a huge ROI. This really enabled me to grow my own net worth. And this investment in this training program and then later investing in advertising had a much higher return than if I would have invested this passively in index funds. For example, if you invest in paid advertising, you could expect an 100 to 200% return on investment already the next month, compared to an 8 to 10% return annually, yearly in the stock market. So for example, one business that spends $1,000 in paid advertising 1 month could expect to see possibly $2,000 to $3,000 in sales the next month. So can you see here how strategic investments in your own skills can have a much higher potential than investing passively in the stock market? And when learning about investing or hearing about the FIRE movement and becoming financially independent, this is something that is rarely talked about because most people, they talk about the idea of one day when you no longer need to work, when you can just sit on a beach, and when you have passive income that covers all your expenses. But in my experience, that often is used as a sales tactic to get people hooked because most people dislike their job and dream of a time when they no longer need to work. But at the same time, these influencers who talk about passive income and retiring early, they run their own YouTube channels, they run their own small businesses to talk about this. So they are actually having a new type of job or a new small business that they run, talking about how other people should retire and not work. So when looking at different opportunities to invest in ourselves and our own skills, there are a few pitfalls to look out for in my experience. For example, some people, they only listen to podcasts and watch videos online and watch short form content about entrepreneurship and personal development, and they are hooked on those dopamine kicks all day long while they're not really learning. So while they think they develop and learn, they're actually not developing very much. And I believe that there are thousands, if not millions of people that are stuck in this behavior, thinking that they're learning and developing while actually they're only stuck in dopamine addiction for short form video content at the moment. So what we want to do is go beyond this step. When I was at a seminar with Brian Tracy, he talked about that in his 70s, as he was then, he was then studying about 4 hours per day. He was putting 4 hours a day in his own personal development. And that was really an eye-opener for me, that he was still spending so much time developing himself and becoming a better person so he could be relevant even though he was in his 70s. So if we adopt this idea of developing ourselves and doing it in a deeper way rather than watching content online, there are a few ways that we can do this. We could read books and we could take courses to develop ourselves. For example, when I bought programs and courses to develop myself, the more costly they have been, the more motivated they have made me to get most of my investment, to really study and to start using the skills and the knowledge that I learn in the course. For example, when I took that course on paid advertising or learning about sales, for example. And in the past, I've taken courses on personal finance, paid advertising and how to run a business, personal development and leadership and planning. So these types of things. And in the moment, I've always doubted a little bit if I should make this investment or not, if that's the best use of my money. But then afterwards, in hindsight, I often thought that I should have taken the even more expensive one because I got so much out of it. And if I had invested more in that program or learned even more, then I would have developed and seen an even higher return on the investment. And learning this skill has always been a great move because learning from the best gives an edge that we can start using by teaching others this skill. So learning from the best is a very, very good principle to apply when taking courses and when learning. So I've taken courses from both private entrepreneurs and businesses and more educational programs that have run in Stockholm, for example, and also from top universities in the US. So it can be from different providers or different businesses and platforms. Another way one can learn is by self-study. And this is something that very few people are deeply involved in when you talk about rigorous self-study. And this is something that we get used to when we learn an instrument. So if you have learned and mastered one instrument, you really know what this means, because while learning an instrument, we cannot really fake playing an instrument because everyone will know. So we really need to put the hours into practice and mastering it. And we can use the same discipline in any other subject we want to master. We can read books about this subject, for example, and practice it until we really know it. And if we look at one of the most effective ways to learn an instrument, to see how we can apply that for other areas, is transcribing. And that is a method that is used in jazz. And you learn it, you use it by copying what another person is doing, basically. So a person who wants to master jazz, they could take a very complicated jazz solo by Charlie Parker, for example. And then they would listen and learn that piece note by note and even writing it. So that they would copy what another person is doing. And this is a very effective way of learning an instrument and learning a type of dialect or a style in music. And this is very time consuming, it takes a lot of energy, and it is almost feared by musicians because it's a very rigorous way of learning, but it's one of the most effective ways of learning an instrument and the fastest way to get ahead. So it's very, very effective. So after the musician has learned this new piece by listening note by note, writing it down, practicing it until they can play this piece by heart, they have now taken a huge step forward in their development and really gotten a deep understanding of this dialect in music, this style, so that they can start to use that in their own playing and in their own improvisation. Great writers has also used this method. For example, both Jack London, who wrote Call of the Wild, and Benjamin Franklin used this method. So writers can also use this method to really become good at using words, really become good at how great authors describe things and integrate that into their own writing. So can you see how this form of rigorous study really excels the player and make them develop and reach a new level in their skill? And this type of rigorous study, you could also say that Warren Buffett used a similar type when he was reading through the Moody's manuals. It was these thick books with thousands of pages of all the companies in the US listed from A to through the whole alphabet. And he would go through each one, read a few seconds about each company, and if he found something that he was interested in, he would go deeper and research that company. So this was a way for him to find things that other investors did not find. And he could do this by being more disciplined and having a more rigorous study than others. So can you see what an amazing opportunity that is to learn something that other people don't have the discipline or the audacity to do? So how can we start using this principle in our own study? I have, for example, copied out books by hand that I really want to learn from and how the author is thinking. For example, I copied out The Richest Man in Babylon, later more difficult books like Poor Charlie's Almanac, later the chapter 8 and 20 from The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham and other business books. And to me, this is a great way of really integrating the lesson that the person is trying to teach. And it's very different from only reading the book once and then putting it away. Because if you copy the book out word by word, you really need to pay attention to what you're doing. And you're really spending several hours, many hours in one particular book. And you're really integrating details in your own thinking that you would have otherwise missed. So in my experience, that is a very good way of learning. And it is also the opposite way of how many people are studying by only listening to short form videos, or watching short form videos, or more shallow learning by only listening to audiobooks, for example. This is a way how you're really studying deeply and practicing your focus into one particular subject that you can later use. This is also a very cost-effective way of learning, because you only spend money to buy the book, and then you're basically only spending your time and your focus by copying it out by hand. So can you see here how these different ways of investing in yourself can have a great return on investment, both by investing in high quality, expensive courses that few others invest in and that are highly relevant for you, and learning from the best. That is a very good way of learning and developing. But also this rigorous self-study where you read books, where you copy out books, things that are more, that take more deep focus that many people don't have the discipline to do. If you can start doing those things, that will put you apart, and you will soon become a very knowledgeable and wise person, and you can start applying this knowledge and teach it to others. So I encourage you to use these different layers of studying, and soon you will have a way of thinking that is very different from others, and that is very influenced by the individuals and the mentors you want to study and learn from. And that will make you very attractive in the marketplace. If you want to have a job, or if you have a business, people want to have your skills, they want to be consulted by you. And if you make investments, you will be able to take more informed investment decisions and make fewer mistakes than people who only watch short form videos and listening to podcasts, for example. So I encourage you to get going with your rigorous self-study, because it will set you apart. See you next week.